You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and it just feels a little too real? Well, we've all heard those whispers, right? Stories from movie sets where the line between what's on screen and what's happening in real life starts to get seriously blurry, where bizarre accidents, spooky coincidences, and even death seem to linger long after the cameras stop rolling. So, that's the big question we're going to tackle. Are some of these movies actually genuinely cursed? We're talking about the absolute legends here. The Omen, The Exorcist, Poltergeist. These are movies where the stories from behind the camera are sometimes way scarier than anything that made it into the final cut.
Okay, so what do we even mean by a cursed set? It's this really specific kind of story that pops up when a movie about, demons or the occult suddenly gets hit with all this real-world tragedy. And instead of people just saying, oh, that's a coincidence or that was a terrible accident, the story becomes something darker, like it's some kind of cosmic payback.
And there's probably no film in history that fits this legend better than the 1976 classic, The Omen. Seriously, the production was hit by so much disaster that a lot of the people involved really started to believe some kind of evil force was actively trying to stop them. And the weird stuff started happening almost right away. And it's so improbable, you just can't ignore it. Think about this. The odds of a commercial plane getting hit by lightning are pretty low, right? It happens maybe once a year on average. But during the making of The Omen, three separate planes. One with the star, Gregory Peck, another with the screenwriter, David Seltzer, and a third with the producer, Mace Neufeld. All of them zapped by lightning. What are the odds? Things got so bad that the film's own producer, Harvey Barnhart, actually started carrying a cross around with him on set. He was absolutely convinced that by making a movie about the Antichrist, they had made themselves a target.
And it just felt like one thing after another, a total cascade of disaster. Get this, the crew chartered a plane for some aerial shots, but they switched it out at the very last second. That plane they were going to use, it crashed, killed everyone on board. Then there was an animal handler, worked on that truly terrifying baboon scene. Not long after, he was mauled to death by a tiger. And as if that wasn't enough, some of the main crew members barely missed 2 separate IRA bombings in London. At some point, this just can't be bad luck.
But the one story that really sealed the deal on the Omen's cursed reputation? Well, it's almost too neat, too perfectly horrifying to be true. And it's all about John Richardson, the special effects guy who designed one of the movie's most famous and most graphic death scenes. So, years after the movie, Richardson is working on another film over in Holland when he gets into this awful head-on car crash. He actually survived, but his assistant, Liz Moore, was killed instantly. And how? A tire flew through the windshield and decapitated her. It was a shocking, real-life replay of the exact death scene he had so carefully created for the film. But here's the kicker. This is the detail that just sends a chill right down your spine. As Richardson is crawling from the wreckage, he looks up and sees a road sign. And on that sign, it's pointing to a Dutch town, the town of Omen. And the distance? 66.6 kilometers away. Yeah, for a lot of people, that was it. That was the final, undeniable proof. This was a curse.
It's a terrifying story, right? It absolutely feels like a curse. But is that the whole picture? What happens if we start to peel back that layer of spooky folklore and look at these events as something else?
And that brings up a really important question. Are we really looking at some kind of evil force attacking a movie set? Or is it possible that this whole curse story is a convenient way to cover up something much more human, like bad decisions, mistakes, and even straight-up negligence?
Let's look at The Exorcist. Now sure, that production had its own share of weirdness, like a mysterious fire that burned down the entire set except somehow for the demon's bedroom. But some of the most famous cursed moments were actually the direct result of choices made by the director.
See, the director, William Friedkin, was obsessed with getting raw, authentic reactions. And to get them, he had a stunt rig literally yank Ellen Burstyn, the actress playing the mom, so hard that she suffered a permanent spinal injury. That scream you hear in the movie, that's not acting. That's her real scream of agony. And Linda Blair, just a kid at the time, actually fractured her lower back when another rig malfunctioned. It left her with chronic pain for years. So, was that a demon, or was it just a complete failure of on-set safety?
The Poltergeist trilogy is another one that's considered deeply cursed, partly because 4 of its cast members died tragically young. But the legend really got its footing because of a very specific and pretty grim choice the filmmakers made.
Remember that terrifying pool scene at the end of the first movie? The one where actress Jo Beth Williams is surrounded by skeletons? Well, she thought they were just plastic props. Everybody did. It wasn't until later that she found out they were real human skeletons. Why? Because they were cheaper than making fake ones. So this idea that the film was cursed, it's easy to see how desecrating actual human remains for a movie could give that legend some serious and very rational legs.
So we're seeing this pattern, right? Shifting from just coincidence to some really bad judgment calls. But in a few cases, the curse story hides something way, way worse. Catastrophic and totally preventable. Failures of safety on set.
This right here really lays it out, contrasting the spooky folklore with the cold, hard facts. For movies like Twilight Zone the movie and The Crow, the tragedies that happened weren't caused by a curse, they were caused by documented, undeniable negligence.
July 23, 1982. It's one of the darkest days in the history of Hollywood. A helicopter was flying way too low for a Vietnam War scene. It got hit by some of the special effects explosions on the ground, spun out of control, and crashed. It instantly killed the veteran actor Vic Morrow and two child actors, Micah Din Lee and Renee Shin Yi Chen, who had been hired illegally.
Just over a decade later, another completely preventable tragedy struck. The death of Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow wasn't some kind of spooky freak accident. It was the direct result of a deadly chain of mistakes in how a prop gun was handled.
So let's break down exactly what went so horribly wrong. First, a dummy round, which had a real bullet tip, was used in an earlier scene. That tip got stuck, lodged deep inside the gun barrel. That's mistake number one. Mistake number two, nobody properly checked or cleaned the gun afterwards. So for the scene where Brandon Lee was shot, they loaded the gun with a blank. Now a blank has gunpowder but no bullet. But when it was fired, that gunpowder propelled the bullet tip that was already stuck in there out of the barrel with the force of a real, live round. It was a step-by-step, completely preventable failure. So you see, these tragedies, they weren't caused by demons or evil spirits. They were caused by reckless choices, broken rules, and a system that failed to keep people safe. And the real legacy here isn't some spooky story to tell around a campfire. It was a wake-up call for the entire film industry. And real, actual change came from all this heartbreak. The Twilight Zone accident led to criminal charges and forced massive reforms in child labor laws and stunt safety. Then, Brandon Lee's death forced a complete revolution in how guns are handled on set, which is why today we see so many more digital effects instead of dangerous, real props.
In the end, the idea of a cursed film makes for a great story, but the real story is about a painful and absolutely necessary journey. It's about an industry moving from blaming the supernatural to taking responsibility. These weren't fights against demons. They were hard-won fights for basic safety.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty chilling question to think about. What's actually scarier? The idea of some demon haunting a film set, or the documented, cold, hard reality of human negligence, of recklessness, and of real-world tragedies that absolutely could have and should have been prevented? I'll leave that for you to decide.